Hi everyone, in this video I want to talk briefly about kerning and tracking. Now, kerning is whenever we adjust the space between two letters because visually it looks slightly off. To give you an example, if you look at this title up here, Lord of the Rings, notice how the space between the O and the R looks larger than it does between the O and the L. Now, just to kind of show you what's happening here, technically it is the same amount of space. If we were to draw out a guide, and I'm just clicking on the side here and pulling one out, from the right edge of the L to the left edge of the O, let's pull another one out over here, and from the right edge of the O to the left edge of the R, I didn't quite get it, but you can kind of notice how the spacing is very similar. But what makes it look awkward is this curve part. It's these serifs that are throwing it off. So what you want to do to adjust that spacing is you want to take your type tool and you want to select between the two letters you want to adjust the spacing between. And over here inside your character panel, you will notice that sometimes InDesign is already trying to figure out what that kerning should be. But as with anything, you can always adjust it. And there's a couple different ways to adjust the kerning. So after you've selected inside your text box, go into Properties, come down to Character. You're going to look for kerning, which is this one right here. It sits right below the font size. And you can adjust the kerning a couple different ways, either with the arrow. Clicking up will increase the spacing between those two letters. Clicking the down arrow will decrease it. You can also use its drop down with already set numbers. But sometimes, to be honest, I find the best way to do it is to just start typing it in yourself. So for example, that's -20. You might do it in 10-point increments, 20-point increments. Just keep trying to find something that you think works for you. So let's try 30. Barely moving. Let's go extreme, -100. That feels a little too tight. So let's drop it out to about -75. And if we go to view, screen mode, let's do a preview, get rid of those guides. It now looks a little bit better than it did before. Same thing over here. If you'll notice, when you look at rings, notice it looks like we just have this extra amount of space between the N and the G. And this is not uncommon whenever you have letters together that have a very straight edge and one that's very curved. So again, take your type tool, select between your two letters, come over here to your properties, down to your character panel, and you want to adjust the kerning right here. And right now it's already set at -7, but we want to go more than that. So if that was 100 or so over here, let's do -100 just to see what happens. Brings it in, but still it feels a little too tight. So let's back that off to, let's try -75. There you go. So it looks a lot better. So notice how by adjusting the kerning between those two letters, it feels more evenly spaced. And keep in mind, it's really just a visual aesthetic. All right, now let's talk about tracking. If kerning adjusts the space between two letters, tracking will adjust the space uniformly across multiple letters. So for example, when we look at Lord of the Rings, we have a subtitle, The Fellowship of the Ring. If I deselect it, look how tight this sort of feels at the moment. It feels a little bit squished, and it would help if we had just a little bit more readability between each of these letters. So select your text box, come over to your Properties panel. You want to scroll down to Character, and you'll find the tracking to the right of the kerning. So here's your kerning, here's your tracking. And same way you could adjust your tracking by adjusting the up or down arrows. Selecting up will increase the space. Selecting the down arrow will decrease it, making your letters become tighter. And you can also use the drop down with presets, or you can type it in. So in this particular case, let's just go ahead and start adding space to basically add a little bit of breathability to our text. So we're going to type in 50. And as we do, notice how the space between all those letters increases. Go up to 100. Let's do 200. Let's try 250. Now, what I'm going to try to do is I like, for this particular one, I want to have the left edge of my T line up with the left edge of the L. So let's try 225. 230. And I can do this all day. Close enough. But anyway, so now if we deselect, but notice how much more readability the text looks. It feels like all your letters are less squished, they have some room to breathe on their own. So the deal with working with tracking is you have to know when to say when. If you add too much space between each letter, you can get to the point where the word is no longer being read. Rather, the focus has now become on each individual letter. And kind of give you an example of that. Let's highlight that. Now, let me just change this to fellowship just for the moment. I'm gonna go massively huge on this. Let's try 2300. So now notice by increasing the tracking so much, the word fellow becomes a little bit more difficult to read because now the eye doesn't necessarily see a word. Instead, it sees each individual letter. And so when your focus begins to shift from reading the word to your eye focusing more so on the letter, you've gone too far. So that's just one of the things that you're going to have to learn to uh, visually recognize as you're working with tracking.